Hello everyone online. Hope you're well. Let's hope the electricity holds today. May I clarify the receptive hearing you mentioned? Is it also known as open awareness, which is, as far as I know, vipassana? Do you know what etymology is? Etymology? It's the study of the origin of words. Yeah? You must have a word in Thai for that. Etymology? Anyway, the study of the origin of words. Entomology, you know what that is? Study of insects. Anyway, etymology is the study of the origin of words. And a word like vipassana, words we think are just one thing, but words have a history. Words in English that were used in the 14th century might be used differently in the present century, right? So the word vipassana has a history, and that history is almost 3,000 years old. So one of the doubts that come up for um, Buddhists is around language, because the word vipassana can be used in many ways by many teachers at different times in history and even in the present moment. So if you're if you're trying to figure out Buddhism conceptually, then you'll always be in the realm of opinions. And opinions are still sankharas. They're they're contingent. They depend. But if you're attending to your experience, right, and you're looking at your experience, and then you're taking the whole structure of the Four Noble Truths, right, and in your experience, you feel discontent of any sort, major or minor. Now, that experience is not an opinion, it's something felt. This is happening. You could call it dukkha, you could call it Mickey Mouse, whatever you want to call it, right? You are feeling discontent or suffering. So it's very important to realize we're considering experience rather than just being um, limited by opinions. So the word vipassana, then you'd have to say, well, what context is that used in? Who is using it? When was that being used? Um, so if you look at, I mean, I'm not a wordsmith, and I'm not an academic. I've always had my upbringing has been more through the oral tradition, through Luangpor Cha, Luangpor Sumedho, and others, rather than through the written tradition. So I relate more to the words of my teachers rather than the words of texts. I've used the words of text. I've studied a little bit, but my teachers have been my Tripitaka, as it were, my canon. So then if you look at the word vipassana, from what little I know, it would have existed in the time of the Buddha. It exists in the canon. So we have it in the Pali in various ways. I can't list them for you. Then maybe what, 200 years, 100 years, 200 years after the passing of the Buddha, we have the Abhidhamma. So then that's a whole 200 years have gone by, and whoever put the Abhidhamma together, they were intellectuals. It's a very intellectual text. And then Vipassana must have got defined again from some consideration from the original texts. Then there would have been commentaries, and then you get Visuddhimagga coming out, what is it, maybe 800 years after the passing, or 800, I think it's 5 AD, they say. Of that, yeah. So it's probably 900 years after the passing of the Buddha. That's a long time for one word. And then it gets defined again. Then you get Mahasi Sayadaw, Lady Sayadaw, teachers like that. presenting in a modern context. And they say, uh, we teach Vipassana. I so you kind of have to know where the teacher's coming from before you even think you know what that word is. What do you mean by that word? And so with me, that word comes from my relationship to Luangpor Cha, and he didn't make a big deal out of it. He never said samatha vipassana are separate. That wasn't the thing with him. But say maybe the Burmese tradition, because of for some reasons they wanted to define it in different ways. So you need the context. Otherwise, you'll always get a different interpretation of a word, and you'll always be in doubt, and your mind will always be attached to doubt because it's just an opinion. So the way I use the word, and I might be totally wrong, but am I wrong? I just know this is the way I use the word. And the way I use the word is it's just the application of intelligence to cause and effect to such that I realize suffering, its cause, its end, and the path, which seems to me a pretty reasonable kind of thing to be doing. That's what I'm doing. But that I can apply to my experience. It's not an opinion. If I feel discontent and I'm saying, well, what's the problem here? What's the problem? I'm annoyed at this guy. Oh yeah, yeah, I see. And that to me is vipassana. Now you might say, oh no, vipassana is like a deep, deep insight into anicca. Okay, if you want to define it that way, that's fine. I don't. I so what I try to do is I try to get all these words in the whole context of the Four Noble Truths. Because like how we can take a sentence out of context. Maybe someone says something in the public forum in a long speech, and then someone takes an extract of that out of context, and it's completely different meaning, right? So these words that we have, the context is the end of suffering and the Noble Eightfold Path. So open awareness, um, that's in the context of Vayama, Sati, Samadhi, right? It's in the context of right understanding, right thought, right effort, right mindfulness, right composure. If you take it out of that, but where does this fit in that construct? And then in that construct, well, what is awareness about? So awareness is about being present, kind of knowing what's going on. Samadhi would be about composure, collectedness. Effort would be about arising the effort to sustain that, abandoning the unwholesome, cultivating the wholesome, and so on and so forth. So then they're not they're just not loose words sitting around on their own. They're in the context of things. Now, open awareness is sometimes used as in the Japanese tradition as shikantaza. And shikantaza, and I'm probably wrong because I'm not Japanese and I'm not Zen, so don't believe me. But from what little I know, is that you can meditate on an object, like anapanasati, or you can hold the mind as witness. Not that they're mutually exclusive. You can still witness the breath and understand. So sometimes that refers to just not taking an object uh, of attention, but still being attentive. Right? So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that issue is quite important in language, because otherwise you can spend a lot of time in vichikicha, in doubt, because a word comes, oh, what's that? Does that really mean? And I think the real question that we should ask ourselves is, can the mind be quiet? I think that's a more important question. Can you ask a question? Sure, we can all ask questions. And can we keep thinking? My gosh, we can keep thinking. There's no doubt about that. But can we be quiet? Can the mind have quietness? And that, to me, would then solve the problem of doubt. Don't go there. Does Vipassana come from the Visuddhimagga or is it in the Abhidhamma? Who cares? Right? Can the mind be quiet? So when we use questioning or insight, we're looking at the Four Noble Truths. Why does the mind get stuck here? And then we're observing in a kind of silent mode. And Pali words especially are you'd think we'd have this technical language, like you have technical language in engineering, in architecture, in IT. And I think the technical language must help people in IT and all that communicate. But I wonder sometimes in Buddhism, because these words are so nebulous and they're defined in different ways but different teacher, I wonder if they don't sometimes create even more doubt. I'm not sure, but you kind of be cautious about that. And then if you if you if you if you're with a teacher or a group of people, is the discussion in the group just going to more opinions? And is that really going to be helpful? Or is the language you're using helping us to understand our experience? Say in Mahayana, they have the word bodhisattva in which is the Sanskrit, and in Theravada we have the word bodhisatta, which is the Pali. They're completely different concepts. So you have to understand the philosophy of Mahayana and which Mahalan, is it Pure Land? Is it which of the Mahayana schools is it? To actually understand what they mean by the word bodhisattva. And in Pali, from what I understand, bodhisatta is simply the previous lives of the Buddha. But so you might think, you're talking with someone from a Pure Land sect and you're using the same word, but actually the philosophical systems are completely different. So rather than say, you guys are wrong, that can't be true. No, 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 you have to know what context do you use that word. So the nice anecdote. You know the difference between antidote and anecdote? Anecdote is a story. Antidote is what you take when you get poisoned. It's the opposite. So in England, when Luangpor Chah was visiting England, um, that was the first visit, 77. And there was a Tibetan Institute. I think I spoke about this before. Manjushri Institute is called in Cumbria, on the Scottish borders. And we had heard that the and they're Mahayana. The Mahayana folk thought that an arahant is selfish, which in their philosophy apparently is. And so they thought those guys down at Chithurst are selfish. And to us, we mean arahant is selfish. It's the end of self. This doesn't make sense. So then their philosophy said that the bodhisattva is a higher degree of enlightenment. I say, yeah, but the bodhisattva is before the Buddha gets enlightened. Totally confusing. What's all this about? So Luangpor Chah goes up there and he's so radiant and charming. And he says, you've heard this quote probably, don't be a bodhisattva, don't be an arhat, don't be anything or you'll suffer. And they say, oh, yes, thank you. But that's how confusion takes place with language. So you kind of look at it in the context, and these words vipassana or samadhi, don't keep them in the context of the whole Four Noble Truths, and then I think you'll have a more sense of what the experience is about rather than an opinion. The second question, Longpaw, in my exploration of this reflexive awareness of knowing, I find myself looking into its nature, e.g., how it feels like, how does it behave, how big it is, where does it abide, etc. Is this appropriate? No. I would suggest that's restlessness. It's still, and I know this person, um, I won't name, um, very good meditator. But I would suggest it's still this kind of need to do something, need to figure something out, need to find something, which is what's to find. If the unconditioned is a kalika dhamma, what's to find? Benyang Niang, it's like this. You're done. But that's not sufficient for the desire mind. Yeah, but it can't be this. No, it must be okay. Really, really look at awareness now. Let's really invest it. It's still like this restlessness of trying to find something, trying to figure something out. And if you can step back and say, well, certainly isn't still. So if you take language, stillness of being, well, this isn't very still. So I would say, because to the desire mind, silence is boring because there's nothing there. And we're so used to having something, looking at something, doing something. So to this person, I would suggest, what about just not doing? What about being, stillness of being? Now, if someone was very, very like wrapped up in confusion, I might say, no, 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 take anapanasati. Take the end of the out breath, really work with the end of the out breath, calm the mind down, get the kind of confusion out of there, do some chanting. I might recommend that. Right. But this person I think is a good meditator. And he's like, well, there's a subtlety now. You don't need to do anything now. You just need to let go and trust. And that's where you can get the language of trust in. But someone who is not there, I might say, well, like, don't trust your mind. Trust in the breath, trust in awareness of the breath. So it's not just one way that one can refer to these things. But in this case, I would say that. Can you please repeat the full teaching that begins the mind going out is the cause? The mind going out is the cause. The result of the mind going out is suffering. So two and one are reversed, right? So usually the Four Noble Truths for everyone, there's suffering and its cause. Luangpor Dun switches it around. He says the cause is the mind going outside. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. And then in the usual formulation, um, the end of suffering is nirodha, and the path to the end of suffering. And nirodha is the abandonment of craving, the letting go of craving, the relinquishing of craving, the cessation of craving. And then the Noble Eightfold Path is right understanding, right thought, right livelihood, right speech, right mindfulness, right effort. I've probably forgotten one, right concentration, and right action. There you go. So that's the Noble Eightfold Path. So Luangpor Dun says the mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind is the path. The result of the mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. Right? So why is that? And that refers more to like not only is there dukkha and discontent, there's also the unconditioned, the uncreated, the unoriginated, the unborn. There is an end to suffering, and that end is awareness itself and the mind not going outside. So the way I formulate that in my own practice is this experience is in awareness. So then I'm emphasizing awareness rather than the objects of awareness. This experience is in awareness. And then I try to trust in that. Um, but these things they are tools and they're about your experience. That's what's so important there. Does it help your experience of liberating you from suffering, or is it just another kind of confused thing that's going to, then don't use it. But don't worry about it. Use what works for you. How could one have compassion toward the person who behaves badly to you and the community? And then the person cites example of two politicians who I will not name, and then a good disparaging sentence after that about these two politicians. So rather than going there, it's a good question. The thing about metta, and it's not binary. It's not an on-off switch. It's not black and white. You either have metta or you don't have. It's a spectrum, right? So, and the spectrum at its one end is to not dwell in aversion, and its other end is loving kindness. So for this person, the idea of wishing these politicians success and happiness is abhorrent. It's horrible. It's a horrible thought. And I kind of agree. But that's not what metta is about. Metta, but if you look at it as a spectrum, then you could see that even someone who is despicable and lives a truly horrible way of being, you could see that if you dwelt in aversion towards them, then you would be cultivating aversion to some extent in stream of consciousness. And that aversion would always limit you because it would manifest in other ways as well. And also by holding to fixed view that this person is a total whatever, it might be true. It might be true, but by holding to that, you create a sense of self. And your identity is with the objective narratives of your life. So you're stuck, which isn't saying then that you like the person. Oh, it's wonderful, because that's not true. You don't like the person, but you can let go of the aversion. Now, some people can take it further. And so I was talking to a friend, and she said she has compassion for Putin, say. Now, if you're Ukrainian, it might be difficult to do, but she says, no, I can do that. Of course, she's not in the war. She's in a free country where that isn't the problem. So we can sometimes feel the suffering of even horrible people. We can imagine it and we can have, wow, that must be really bad. But it's not like you like the person, it's not that. But at the very minimum, not to dwell in aversion because it's for your own protection. And so that is a good question. Sometimes metta does sound terribly sentimental and unrealistic. Um, but the realism of the world is people can be nasty. People, not everyone out there is keeping the five precepts. There are people who cheat you, who are not trustworthy. So you have to be streetwise, but not to dwell in aversion. It won't be good for you or anyone else. Okay. There was another written question, but I'll answer that this evening. So let's stretch the legs and then do some meditation. Maybe we could try the Bhutto. Just again, I'll just give a bit of instruction, and I realize that too much instruction, you have too many techniques, but I feel guilty if I don't say something. The Bhutto is a pretty standard practice in Thailand. So the way I would taught it, um, you're using language to preoccupy the thinking mind, but you're only using two syllables. Bu on the in-breath, do on the out-breath. So you're coordinating the breath, but also you're using language so that the thinking mind is occupied, but with a very, very simple syllable. So in-breath, bu, out-breath, do. And what I do is on the out-breath, I really try to notice the way things are. Do, and in the back of my mind, it's like this. Do, it feels like this. And the out breath is a kind of calming place in the breath cycle. And then let the breath come in. Boo. The out breath. Do. So it's a very good technique. Um, but again, breathing practice can put people to sleep. So if you're finding that doing any kind of anapanasati variant puts you to sleep, then don't do it. Right? It's or increase the volume and amplitude of your breath, make it stronger. Or I won't I won't give you instruction in that, but if you want to try that, you can. But for me to emphasize once your mind is awake enough, because you need energy, and emphasize the end of the out breath. It's like this, and get the sense of the calmness and composure, and let the breath come in, the end of the out breath. If you're sleepy, the end of the out breath will put you to sleep. So you need vitality to do this. Okay, so let's just meditate on that.